Hello and welcome to Hamer Reviews. My name is Christopher Hamer and today we're doing something of a pre-review of the Nikon TC-2.0x Z series teleconverter. Now, I was going to do a full review and I feel like I know a lot about this teleconverter, having used one for the last couple of weeks. But the fact of the matter is that I'm not entirely convinced by the image quality in the situations where I've been able to test it in order to tell you that this is my full and final review. So see this as a well-educated preview of the teleconverter, because I've been out, I've used it in various different locations, usually with the Z6 II and the 70-200 2.8S, as well as the Z6, and I've been quite impressed and quite disappointed at the same time. So let's talk about the actual ecosystem before we talk about this teleconverter. Currently, the only lens you can use this with is the 70-200 2.8S. That is a very expensive lens, and I can't really see any lenses coming out in the near future that are going to work with these teleconverters. Now, there are a 100 to 400 millimeter lens and 200 to 600 millimeter lens earmarked on the roadmap, but we don't actually know when it will be released. So perhaps sometime next year you'll be able to add a lens that can use these, but at the moment your only option is the 70-200. Now, as a result, the 2.0x teleconverter makes quite a compelling proposition. You add it onto the 70-200 and you get a 140mm to 400mm lens. Now we're starting to get into that super telephoto focal length, which is quite appealing to many people. Add to that this lens becomes a 5.6 when you add it, and actually that's not a bad compromise. The thing is though, this teleconverter costs £600. That's a lot of money. At the point where you add the 70-200, you're talking about £3,000. That's quite a high level of investment for a super telephoto lens. In the past, I've been quite hesitant to go for 2.0 teleconverters because I just think you lose so much quality from the lens that you're shooting with that they're just not worth it. However, the 1.4x teleconverter, I was stunned by. You can actually see my full review of that above at the moment, but it was just incredible. It was sharp, contrasty, didn't lose any of the detail, any of the capabilities of 70-200, so it was fantastic. So would this hold up to that sort of expectation? Well, in order to review it, I had to get one first, and that was even more difficult. I had one on pre-order. At the same time, I had the 1.4x teleconverter and the 70-200. Did I get one on launch day? No. Did I then order one from various other places and try and get one? Yes, I put myself down on waiting lists, various different camera stores. Was never called back, no one ever had one, and to be fair, if I look at the comments on various forums and Facebook groups, etc., it looks like there just aren't that many of them about. In the end, I actually ordered this from Italy. Now, as a UK consumer, and I do buy a fair bit of Nikon gear, it's a bit disappointing that I had to go out of country in order to get one and pay a little bit of a premium at the same time. But I do have one. So what's it like? So if I mount it on the 70-200, I'm going to show you first what it makes it look like, because I think that's going to explain a few things. I think the 70-200 is fairly long already for a Z-mount lens. And so when you add this 2.0x teleconverter, you actually make it even longer. And I find it actually tips the balance of the lens even further forward. It becomes quite a front-heavy combination. That's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just something that you're going to have to get used to when you're shooting with it, especially given the zoom rings at the very front of the lens. There's some really nice touches, which is when you actually use this with the 70-200, the info screen actually will show the correct focal length, so 140 all the way through to 400mm, so that's quite nice. And it will also show that the minimum aperture has moved to 5.6. What I was really impressed by is that the autofocus speed is just as quick with the teleconverter as it is without it. So there's no impact of having that teleconverter on there. And I have to also add to that when I was shooting with the Z6 II, the autofocus performance was no worse either. In fact, it locked on almost every time and I had almost no shots that I missed as a result of the autofocus being too slow or the tracking having issues. So that combination is very good. In terms of image quality, that's where I sit on the fence. I mean, I've had some sample photos go up and you can see a few more now, but I'm just not convinced that it keeps the same level of sharpness as the 1.4 teleconverter is capable of. That's a bit of a shame because the 2.0 had my hopes set quite high. I was kind of thinking, to be honest, this combination might mean that I don't need to even consider the 100 to 400mm lens because it's going to give me 140 to 400. And to be fair, I find if I'm shooting at the further end of 400, I'm not going to need that closer end of 100mm. Like 140mm would be absolutely fine. So I thought that would actually be a good combination. But I feel like you lose a fair bit of image quality. And even looking through the electronic viewfinder, I sort of had that impression. That's not to say that this is a bad lens or bad teleconverter. It's just that you always lose some of that quality, and I'm just trying to decide whether you're losing too much sharpness and contrast or whether it's acceptable. Perhaps those of you that have used the TC 2.0 Mark III for the f-mount would be absolutely fine with this, but if I'm going to be shooting with this kind of lens and camera combination, I kind of expect very high image quality, and I just wasn't feeling that I was getting that. But given that the autofocus performance is so good, perhaps it is just my bias towards teleconverters that's influencing my view on this. Because I expected it to be worse before I got it. So perhaps my biases there are actually influencing how I look at the images. Because at the moment I can only really look at the JPEGs from the Z6 II. I mean, I can look in Capture and XD, but in all honesty, I hate that software so much that I don't really use it, so I'm waiting for Adobe Camera Raw to update. But the JPEGs do look quite good. It's just that extra bit of sharpness that I don't think is there. So the TC 2.0 Z teleconverter has some issues. First off, if you want one, you can't get one. That's a major issue that Nikon needs to address because the supply issues with various Z-mount kit has been pretty poor recently, so hopefully they can really up their game there. Then it's very expensive. You only have one lens you can use it with, and I'm not 100% convinced that the image quality is as good as it should be. So whether you want one or not, or rather need one, this is what I think should influence your decision. Do you currently have an f-mount lens that would give you this range that you're using with the F to Z adapter? If the answer is yes, and you're happy with the image quality, I think you should stick with that for now and wait for a few more reviews from other people to come out because, hey, I might be wrong. My opinion could be completely way off here. But I think if you're getting good image quality, this is already becoming quite a cumbersome combination. Is your F to Z adapter plus your f-mount lens going to be that much bigger? You need to think about that. If the answer to that is no, and you don't have that combination, you should ask yourself whether you need the 70 to 200 2.8S. Because if you don't, and you're not planning on buying it, I don't think you should make the exception to buy it in order to get the teleconverter and get that extra reach. I think you probably want to look back at Nikon's f-mount catalogue. Equally, do you need it now? If you don't, maybe you should be waiting for the 100 to 400mm Z-mount lens and see what that's like before dipping into this, because I was actually trying to give some advice to a friend of mine about whether they should buy the 70 to 200 or the 100 to 400. And I was actually saying, from a use case perspective, the 100 to 400 might make more sense if you're going to shoot more at that long end, because this is quite cumbersome. And if you're not going to use the 70 to 200 as a 2.8 most of the time, then I don't really see the point in having a teleconverter permanently attached to it. So there's what I think. That's it. It's an interesting piece of equipment. I'm not 100% sure whether it's worth the £600 asking price at the moment. It certainly performs well from a autofocus perspective and seemingly from a compatibility perspective with the Z-mount and the 70 to 200 2.8S. Make your mind up from maybe the sample shots we've seen, watch a few other reviews. Other people have reviewed this, but just not as many as you'd expect because of, I believe, the supply issues. But it would be great to hear if you've used it, what you think. Am I way off the mark here? As I said, I'm going to review this again once I've had a bit more time and a few different shooting situations, and I'm going to see if my opinion changes. Perhaps I'll be singing its praises next. What I will say, however, is if you are considering the 1.4 times teleconverter, I think the optical performance of that is fantastic, and I wholeheartedly recommend it. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this was useful. I know it got a bit rambly there towards the end, but it's a difficult one for me to address because I'm just not sure how I feel about it yet. If you have any other questions, pop them in the comments section. If you have any experience with it, please pop them in the comments section too. I'd love to hear what you think and what your experiences are with this teleconverter. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. I'm not going to tell you not to because this was rambly, so it wasn't the best, but hopefully it just conveys what I feel. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe. I promise you some of these videos are a little bit more direct and usually have a bit of a clearer message, and it really helps when you do subscribe, so please do. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again next time. Goodbye.